Welcome. I'm Jenny Rittenauer, Director of Alumni Chapter Programs at Virginia Tech. I'll remove my mask now as I let you know that I, along with all of our panelists, are joining you from our own personal spaces and, of course, following all the health guidelines as we take part in this virtual event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Hokies for Good event, Tech for Humanity. We're excited to introduce not only this program, but this entirely new and exciting series. For many Hokies, UPROSM is more than a mindset, it's a lifelong calling. You can find these experts and advocates tackling some of our world's greatest challenges with passion and perseverance. They're a positive force for change, and that's why we're celebrating them. Hokies for Good is a series of conversations and events with those who have dedicated their careers to humanity's most pressing issues. From those designing new solutions in clean water to those at the leading edge of global systems science, we'll shine a spotlight on Hokies around the world that challenge us all to make a difference. For this Hokies for Good launch program, we couldn't wait to get a front row seat to learn more about the role of ethics, equity, and responsible innovation in technology that will shape our world for decades to come. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Christina Miller, Director of Alumni Relations for the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, to welcome our speakers.
Thank you, Jenny. Networks of humans and machines are informing our decisions and improving our lives at home, on the highway, at work, and at play. As Virginia Tech and partners create these technologies, we have the responsibility and the opportunity to do so from the perspective of the human condition, addressing issues of design, access, ethics, policy, and regulation, along with the development of the technology. I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sylvester Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the founding director of the Virginia Tech Center for Humanities. He is a nationally recognized humanities scholar specializing in the study of technology, race, religion, and national security. He is also Assistant Vice Provost for the Humanities at Virginia Tech and Executive Director of the university's Tech for Humanity initiative. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks very much, Christina, for that introduction, and I'm delighted to be able to share in this talk with my colleagues. So one of the things that I'm especially excited about that's happening at Virginia Tech is our university-wide effort to develop multiple ways to help ensure the technology is actually guided by human-centered concerns and that is accountable to human interests. And that really is the central aim of the Tech for Humanity initiative. It is something that really attempts to support and enable and to bring more attention to the many ways that our talented faculty and staff and students across the university are thinking about technology very broadly through comprehensive approaches and recognizing that it is especially important in our time today to understand that technology is not just um, concerned with technical issues. It certainly involves technical dimensions, but it also involves other things, such as policy, ethical considerations, thinking about the impact of innovation on human labor, so the future of work issues, equity and fairness, and the use of AI, and so forth. The use of innovation in healthcare is another area. All of these demonstrate that technology is actually a comprehensive issue. And it's especially fitting that as a comprehensive university that is best known for, or especially known for our leadership in technology, that Virginia Tech is bringing together the talent across the many different dimensions of our university to ensure that the present and the future of our society that has been so deeply shaped by technology is proceeding in a way and particularly impacted by Virginia Tech in a way that puts at the center the interest of a human society and public interest and public good. My colleagues Professor Aaron Brantly and Professor Rebecca Hester are going to share some of the exciting work that they're doing, particularly the Tech for Humanity Lab, for instance, that Professor Brantly is leading, the very exciting research that Professor Hester is doing in biomedical science, and the importance of preparing our students to understand some of the big challenges in her teaching as well as her research. And so they'll be speaking about the ways that they're actually advancing some of the urgent attention that needs to be devoted to taking technology as a comprehensive set of challenges and opportunities that requires a broad range of talent. I want to go to our next slide and explain a bit about what's happening here in order to give some further indication of why it is important to recognize that technology is actually a broad human challenge that is not limited to a particular field or a particular discipline or a particular area of expertise. So in this slide, we have an image of a debate that happened almost 2 years ago in February of 2019. So you see in the background the hashtag Think 2019. This was a debate, one of the earliest debates between a human being, in this case, Harish Natarajan, and the machine algorithm developed by the IBM Corporation, which is in that black box that you see standing up in the background. This is a debate that happened on Intelligence Squared, which is hosted by John Donvan, who's there to your left in this image. And to your right, you see a couple of technicians who are in the background just ensuring that IBM's software, which is called Project Debater, is running smoothly and doing its thing during this debate. So this debate is very fascinating. As I said, it's one of the very few times, not the very first, but one of the few times that there's been a full-on debate between a human and a machine. In this instance, the Project Debater, IBM's machine learning debate software, which is an AI system, so this is an example of artificial intelligence. And this human champion, very well respected and very successful debate champion, Natarajan, in the middle there, were debating this question: should preschool be subsidized? So I want you to think about that question. Should preschool be subsidized? So they debated different sides of that. Natarajan argued that preschool should not be subsidized. And IBM's Project Debater argued in the affirmative that preschool should be subsidized. This type of question is not a simple question. It's not a yes or no question. It requires what some people call fuzzy thinking or complex analysis, because there are lots of variables that feed into an attempt to answer the question. And so you can, if you're curious, you can actually go to YouTube or IBM's research site and you can see the entire debate that happened. It's quite fascinating. I'll just summarize it quickly for you. The IBM's Project Debater gave a really powerful opening statement, a very information-rich analysis of the issue, with some humor thrown in there, creative responses to the counter argument by Natarajan. And Natarajan also did a great job of explaining the complexity of this issue and why he thought, for example, that it would be a better use of public funds to do things other than subsidizing preschool. In the end, the human won this debate, but not by much. The metric was who changed the most minds. And Natarajan actually changed more minds of the viewers, of the humans in this audience. But the audience agreed that they learned a lot more about the issue by listening to Project Debater. And if you listen to this debate, what you will understand is that each of these individuals, so the Project Debater and the human debater, had only 15 minutes to prepare. for the debate. They were given the topic 15 minutes before the start of their competition. The IBM project debater was really good at not just presenting facts or information, but also developing an argument. This project debater can listen to what a human is saying, understand in real time. It uses natural language processing, so it can understand spoken speech and can pick out the argument in that speech and develop its own counter argument in real time. So that requires understanding whatever the issue is, being able to make sense of the topic, being able to make sense of what a person is saying, being able to identify the structure, the logical structure of arguments, and being able to identify what can count as evidence that might falsify that argument, that can show why it's flawed, what may be wrong about it. And again, this is done in real time. So no one was telling this AI how to disagree with the human opponent. That's actually a pretty sophisticated and difficult thing to do. But it's something that the project debater was able to do with quite a bit of success. Even though technically the human won the debate, in reality, what we see is IBM showing the possibilities that can happen when you have AI or artificial intelligence software that might one day perhaps assist humans in making complicated decisions, in this case about politics. You can think of the fact, for instance, that legislators typically vote on thousands of bills. These are the early draft forms of legislation, often without having read most of the information in those bills. If you can think, for example, that you would have to figure out how to develop a response to legislation in draft for thousands of bills at a time over a period of just a few months, you might recognize the impossibility of being able to read that much information in such a small time. But a machine can read that quickly. IBM's project debater can read hundreds of thousands of articles a day and can actually, they say, truly understand this information. So, what if in the near future, something like this software could actually provide an analysis of legislation and summarize policy or make public policy suggestions in conversation with humans who are trying to figure out funding issues using public monies, or what to do with infrastructure plans, or even military decisions, the best strategies for public health crisis. And the machine could analyze the data more than a human could and give advice about it, or maybe even participate at a further level in that decision making. So that's just an example of where this type of technology is already beginning to demonstrate possibilities of application. Now, it should not take much imagination to consider all the things that could possibly go wrong with something like this as well. We know that people tend to attribute a lot of authority to algorithms, to machines, just because it's a machine. Take GPS, for example. Many people have gone the wrong way on a one-way street because GPS told them to make a U-turn and turn left or right, or they've even driven into bodies of water because the machine told them to turn left or turn right. And even though they might have thought, well, this doesn't look quite right, they're also thinking, well, the software's got to be right. This is a computer. And so there's a level of trust issue. There's also the fact that humans create this software, and it's possible, not just possible, it is typically the case that the assumptions and biases that people bring into that become effective and become influential in that software. So whatever problems we have and the assumptions that we bring to whatever issues we're studying can end up becoming part of the software. It's only as good as the material that we bring to it. But there are other issues as well. And once these machines are able to process more information than humans, then there is this problem of people realizing that we have real limitations that machines can move beyond. And so the question then becomes, how do we manage a future and even a present in which AI, in which software is beginning to participate in a lot of the decisions that affect our lives. This is for law enforcement, it's for healthcare, it's for militarism, all kinds of things. And so our Tech for Humanity initiative is really focused on the fact that technology has tremendous implications for our lives as human beings. For example, what does it mean even to be human? To be a human, given the kinds of possibilities that are emerging for people and machines to become combined, often for purposes of medical therapy or corrective regaining, for example, of lost capacities. If someone has a smart AI prosthetic device that they can control by their brain signaling, by their thinking, does this alter their humanity in any way? Who should actually be in charge of controlling the data that's training the AIs? Who gets to say this data set that we're using to program this software so that it can actually understand and make decisions about all kinds of issues that affect people? Are that those data are actually not containing biased data sets, that it meets certain standards? Who gets to say that? And how do we prepare the future of talent to be able to guide this technology when the decisions that are being made promise to be pretty pivotal, and there are lots of things that are at stake. So those are the kinds of questions that require us to consider things like being inclusive and ensuring that the future of talent is diverse, that it incorporates a lot of different peoples and demographics, particularly including people who might have the most to lose if something goes wrong, because those kinds of perspectives and guidelines are going to be essential to ensuring that we achieve the levels of fairness and ethical accountability that are going to be important for a technological future. There are other things that are happening as well with our Tech for Humanity initiative. Technology can be leveraged for all kinds of positive reasons. So over the summer, Virginia Tech actually ran a program to offer English as second language classes for farm laborers in order to support their efforts to really control much more of their own situation, to be able to communicate as they needed to in English, given the challenges that face a lot of migrant farm workers. The university is also going to be offering an institute that's funded by the Henry Luce Foundation next summer, which will bring together experts in theology and religion to understand the ethical challenges that technology innovation is bringing, so that their research that deals with ethical questions, that focuses on social justice issues, can begin to respond to some of these big challenges, because we need to figure out new ways to include a broader range of experts in ensuring that the technology we develop, that the policies that we have, that the considerations that we bring to the table are actually going to be robust enough to ensure that we have equitable outcomes. Virginia Tech also is now part of something called the Public Interest Technology University Network. This is a consortium of over 3 dozen colleges and universities in the United States that are focusing on creating new pathways to ensure that technology produces public good, that it serves public interest. And we are leveraging our research, our teaching, the preparation of our students as future talent, and our public impact in order to ensure that we are promoting civic minded approaches to technology. And so we're really excited about our participation in this consortium as well. It resonates powerfully with our Tech for Humanity initiative, and it becomes one more way that Virginia Tech is partnering and collaborating and positioning the rich talent that we have across the university to be in service, that ut prosim motto that we have, to a human society through our leadership. So we're excited about these things, and I want to look forward now to my colleagues as well, sharing some of the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. There's certainly a lot of exciting things going on and a lot to celebrate, and we appreciate your leadership immensely. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Hester. Dr. Hester is an assistant professor in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society. Her recent research examines contemporary accounts of biological danger and the social, political, and scientific implications of preempting, preventing, and eradicating such danger. Dr. Hester, we appreciate you sharing your research with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Brantly, for involving me in the Tech for Humanity initiative. I'm very honored to be working alongside both of them. I want to share with you a little bit today about how I arrived at the understanding that science, technology, and society are mutually entangled forces. And I want to do that by highlighting my research, which is really focused on immigration, health, and security. So I began my career as a political scientist working on immigration policy. I have lived in Mexico and worked for a number of years with migrant farm worker families in California. And during the early stages of my career, I learned that many of the policies that we developed in the United States, including one of the most famous ones, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, actually led to increased cross-border immigration as rural economies were devastated and subsistence farmers could no longer afford to stay in their communities and feed their families. In fact, I learned that outmigration was an anticipated effect of NAFTA. And this concerned me as a policy scholar to understand how the policies that we make could have paradoxical effects in the lives of people on both sides of the border. Because of the expected growth in cross-border migrants, the US-Mexico border was fortified, and new policies like a policy called Operation Gatekeeper were implemented, which included the increased militarization of the border. And this policy, this idea that we should militarize our border, in turn led to an increase in migrant deaths as desperate breadwinners who were coming up from rural communities were forced to cross into harsher and harsher terrain. So an unanticipated outcome of this border fortification wasn't the migrant deaths, but was actually the fact that many of the people that had made it into the United States were forced to stay here through what is now called forced permanence, because they were too afraid to return home after they had finished working in the season of agriculture or whatever their job was. They were fearful they wouldn't be able to come back. So they were effectively trapped by the national security efforts of the United States, which again was a paradoxical effect of the policy, which was meant to prevent and decrease migration. Because of the economic effects on rural communities and populations that had not had a history of outmigration in Mexico began to leave their communities in droves. And this included indigenous groups who had no history of migration or who had very little outmigration, certainly no cross-border migration, from the Mexican state of Oaxaca. Many Oaxaqueños found their way into the community where I lived on the central coast of California. Triquis, Mixtecos, Mijes, Zapotecos, and other indigenous groups began to show up in the cities and agricultural fields and the supermarkets of California. But one place that they didn't go was the migrant clinic in the town where I lived. Through a conversation with the grant writer at that clinic, I learned that people who spoke an indigenous language or who had an indigenous background from Mexico wouldn't come and get clinical services from the designated migrant clinic. So my efforts in my early career of research were really to understand why migrant workers wouldn't use the clinic that was designated for them. And I began to think then about the relationship between migration and health. So I began to conduct a qualitative research project with indigenous farm workers in California to learn more. And I was surprised then to find that a lack of cultural and linguistic competency was on the part of the health professionals was only part of the answer to why migrant farm workers wouldn't come to the clinic. Health policies in the United States that denied migrants, undocumented migrants, health care was certainly a part of the story. So was a longstanding racism within the Mexican community, anti-indigenous sentiment, but also anti-migrant sentiment in the United States. These were all pieces of the puzzle. But an unexpected piece of the puzzle, and one that led me to start studying science and technology, was the idea that the knowledge systems about the body, about healing, and about the way that biomedical science functions was actually preventing indigenous people from accessing healthcare. As I learned, baked right into the sciences and technologies used in biomedicines were ideas about what it means to be human, what it means to have a normal body, what it means to behave in a normal way, and to have normal and proper hygiene. So for example, during my research, I learned that people who couldn't read the clock or didn't operate on clock time were accused of not giving their children, of being negligent or abusive parents because they didn't give their children medications on time. And so healthcare providers would actually threaten to call CPS on them because they didn't realize that people who grew up working in agricultural fields on sun time in rural communities were not functioning and living their life by the clock. And so they didn't know when to administer the medication. And because of pervasive racism, they also weren't willing or didn't feel comfortable to admit that they didn't know. And so even though they didn't always understand the Spanish being spoken to them, they would just answer in the affirmative when asked if they understood what they needed to be doing to treat their children. So these kinds of assumptions are actually built into the technologies that we make. So for example, pharmaceutical technologies operate on the idea that every normal human being will understand how to work from clock time and that they will respond accordingly. And so I started to really become interested in how our social values get into our science and our technologies. So what I concluded out of the early research I began with farm workers around health was that the assumptions about what all humans should know and do were actually one of the underlying reasons that when Indigenous people would go to the hospital or see a care provider in the United States, they would come out saying that they did not feel healed. So in response to their unequal access to care and the unequal epistemic dynamics they encountered in the US healthcare system, Indigenous migrants began to develop their own binational organizations. And you can see on the slide, the one with everyone's fists raised, those are several of my Indigenous friends at a binational meeting. They developed their own binational organizations and used them as platforms to resist many of the social and structural forces that undermine their health. And also they use these organizations to implement Indigenous health promotion programs. The book that I've been working on, tentatively titled Embodied Politics, documents these extensive efforts that they have gone to over a number of decades now to try to implement Indigenous health practices. Based on what I learned from my Indigenous interviewees, I began to study the biomedical sciences like an anthropologist studies the cultural formations of an unfamiliar group of people. I studied the ideas, the rituals, the customs, the costumes, the languages, the artifacts, and the histories of biomedicine in the United States and in other countries, especially Mexico. I wanted to know how the cultures of biomedicine shaped both the clinical and cultural encounters that people were having in biomedical settings. As part of that effort, I went to work at a medical school, and through the support of the National Institutes of Health, I began to study the ways that medical students were trained to deal with diversity. During that period of my career, I learned that physicians are not taught to think about, see, or address the social, economic, or political context of their patients. They're predominantly taught to see and think about their patients in a reductionist fashion, focused on their bodies and their biology, looking for pathology and abnormalities while relying on stereotypes to diagnose and treat them. Physicians learn to pay attention to the identities of their patients only if they have some purported connection to their pathology. So one that comes up a lot is the relationship between Ashkenazi Jews and Tay-Sachs. The scientific connections between identity and pathology pushed me to think more about the life sciences and biology, especially about how scientific ideas and social values mutually inform each other. I started researching the life sciences, especially infectious diseases, noticing the ways that immigrants and foreigners are traditionally blamed for being vectors of disease, or more recently for being bioterrorists. From the 2009 swine flu outbreak, in which Mexicans were blamed for being walking germ warfare weapons by some national talk radio hosts, to COVID-19, which has derogatorily been labeled the China virus. These connections between disease and social difference have been longstanding, and so too have the efforts that are meant to prevent, detect, and fight every form of perceived biological danger coming over our borders. My current research builds on this background by looking at what and who more importantly, constitutes biological danger in the contemporary context, and what is being done to combat it. Following along with my interest of seeing how social values get baked into the science and technologies that we make, I've been studying things that are meant to prevent the incursion of biological danger into the national body. So from border walls to biosurveillance to biometrics, I'm now interested in the ways that biodefense and biosecurity practices continue to assume a particular body, individual or national, as normal and healthy, while perpetually trying to immunize itself from those who have historically been deemed as foreign, invasive, or unhealthy. I've translated these, next slide, please. I've translated these concerns into a number of initiatives at Virginia Tech. Notably, I co-founded the Virginia Consortium for Refugee, Migrant, and Displacement Studies. I am co-developing a minor in displacement studies, and I'm also the Associate Director of Education at the newly formed Center for Refugee, Migrant, and Displacement Studies at Virginia Tech. My role in these initiatives is to educate students and the community on the health conferring effects of diversity, not just for democracy, but for the gene pool, and to support those refugees, migrants, and displaced groups whose humanity has historically been degraded, not just by society, but also by many scientific and technological advances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hester, and thank you for your good work. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Aaron Brantly, an assistant professor of political science at Virginia Tech, whose research focuses on issues related to cybersecurity from multiple angles, including human rights and development, intelligence and national security, and military cybersecurity. His interests span the political science and computer science divide. Dr. Brantly, we appreciate you sharing your research with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Over the course of my career, I've worked in a variety of different capacities. I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer in Eastern Ukraine with the youth development program there. I was one of the first youth development volunteers in Eastern Ukraine in a small town on the periphery of the Russian frontier. And I was asked to teach computer science following the Orange Revolution in a place that neither had internet nor had sufficient computers. And so I would go back and forth to the capital and download sections of the internet on a USB drive and build them into local networks so that the students could see what it was kind of like to have the internet. As I was there, I got to see the mobilizing power of technology as the internet moved in and they started getting mobile access to internet and other technologies to really learn about and understand the political and social implications of new and diverse information ecosystems. And when I've completed my time in Peace Corps, I actually joined the International Republican Institute, one of the two national democracy organizations founded under the National Endowment for Democracy. And while there, I worked in a variety of different countries as a global support operations person and got to see how technology used in election monitoring in a variety of different countries could be used to facilitate communications among activists in both political realms as well as gender and human rights realms. And this mobilizing power of technology was really quite important to me and really helped spur my early interests in the field of technology and human security in particular. After completing my graduate degrees, I went back into the human rights realm, working for the National Democratic Institute as a senior program officer for information communication technologies and innovation. And I got to work principally in Europe and the Middle East, but also in Africa and other places on a variety of different projects related to technology and human rights, and really got to get firsthand experience on developing projects, including using code-based solutions to get human rights activists into and out of countries with large volumes of data so that they wouldn't be arrested at the border. After that, I transitioned over and I worked for the U.S. government and for the military for a few years, working on intelligence and national security projects. And there I got to see the other side of the coin and how states leverage the power of technology, both for good to keep the nation safe, but also sometimes beyond the scope of what we would hope the nation would do and what our political or elected officials might want when we see the overreach of intelligence or technological solutions in a variety of different ways. Um, that being said, when I got back to the civilian realm here at Virginia Tech, I was fortunate enough to be able to bridge both my experience in human rights and technology and military and intelligence technology into a robust research agenda. However, it's always been my goal to kind of reorient and focus on the implications of technology for human security and the impact of technology on the human condition broadly. And this has led me to work with Dr. Johnson and Dr. Hester and others on developing the Tech for Humanity Lab. And our lab is principally organized around the concept of understanding the impact of technology broadly constituted in ways that it impacts political, medical, social, economic, and environmental securities. The lab is inherently transdisciplinary. We have individuals who are part of the computer science department. We have individuals from STS. We have political scientists. We have a number of other students and faculty from around the university who are increasingly becoming involved in this program. And our goal is to leverage a variety of different technologies to really challenge our basic concepts about how technology fits into our present day life, but also into where we see ourselves moving in the future. And so a lot of the things on this slide are things that we are implementing in our current lab. For instance, we have AR capabilities within the lab. We have drones and other types of things. We have 3D printers. And actually the bottom right is a prosthetic that we printed as a test case to demonstrate. We have augmented and virtual reality systems that allow students to really quite literally gain a different perspective on the world that they're engaging in. We have a new application that we just put in the lab that allows you to experience life from other people's shoes. And our goal in the future is to begin collecting 3D environments where people can essentially experience what it's like to physically be in other people's positions, both intellectually, but also to really feel those senses visually and auditorily. Next slide, please. As a part of this effort, in addition to engaging in research at the intersection of technology and humanity, we really feel that there's a very strong need to get students involved at every level of our programming. And so we've worked really hard to develop integrated learning environments, including a large simulation-based system that brings students into an immersive environment and allows them to experience complex scenarios that are inclusive of human, environmental, technological, economic, digital, business concerns, all simultaneously working together in groups across 3 different colleges in about 19 different departments. And so we work together with these various different students from all of the different backgrounds, and we run them through a variety of different programs and simulations and activities. And so in these pictures, you can see faculty from business, from computer science, myself in political science, all teaching classes and getting students from different backgrounds to think about technology and security and the human condition from a variety of different perspectives, so that when they leave Virginia Tech, they're not stovepiped into a particular discipline, but rather they're able to think about things from multiple different perspectives. So a political scientist who graduates and goes into policy can understand the basics of technology and ask those questions of developers or others, or a developer who goes into a company like Facebook and say, am I making decisions that increase or decrease human security? And we also give the students hands-on experience. And so they get to fly drones in the room. And when they walk in the room on the first day, there's a drone flying up with facial recognition software running on it that identifies their faces and other things. So we really try and incorporate both the research and the teaching as a synchronous, as a synergistic whole. Next slide, please. As a part of this, this is moving and advancing my own research agenda, which has principally been focused in 2 veins or lines of research, including research on how states decide to leverage different types of technologies against one another in malicious or defensive ways. And so I started off by looking at the decision matrices of states. I then expanded into generally how does the United States leverage policy and law and other types of decisions to implement national security concerns. I then went back with my co-author again, and we began examining in much more detail how states engage in cybersecurity, what the evolution of cybersecurity has been, all the way back dating to the 1950s and 60s, all the way to the present. We look at the technological aspects of this and where there's human security concerns and overlaps between intelligence and crime and war and all these different things. As a part of my overall research agenda, I've also been working heavily with the Department of Defense on a variety of different projects. Our most recent project that was funded by the Department of Defense came at the request of US Cyber Command, was on understanding how states think about deterrence in cyberspace to keep each other safe. And so we brought together a bunch of scholars from around the world to write a project that looks at how we can make sure that actors are behaving the way they should, how we can deter them from doing bad things in cyberspace. So if I were to summarize everything together, our research at the lab and my research as a faculty member here at Virginia Tech really emphasizes the importance of technology in impacting the human condition and understanding how technology at all different levels, whether it be at the individual human level, whether it be at the community level, the state level, or even national or international level, how technology is coming to shape how we perceive one another, how we interact with one another, how we engage in war and peace, and how we engage in mobilization around various different civic initiatives as well. And so we are just at the beginning of this phase, and we will be moving forward quickly in the coming months. We've already got a bunch of different posts by students up on our website, the techforhumanitylab.org. And we've also gotten CEOs of some companies to talk about some of their initiatives and others in blog posts as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brantly, and to all of you for sharing your good work and research today. We really appreciate it. We are going to ask you each one question. Jenny, do you want to get us started?
My first question is for Dr. Johnson. Can you talk a bit more about how Tech for Humanity is integrated across the university within the departments, and also opportunities that exist with Innovation Campus?
Yeah, absolutely. The Innovation Campus, of course, is one of the very important and ambitious undertakings of Virginia Tech that's still in its early stages. So I'm excited to see how those possibilities for the initiative can emerge to be part of the Innovation Campus. We have a new executive director and vice president, Lance Collins, of that campus, who has newly arrived. And as he develops the vision for that, I think that it's reasonable to expect there will be many opportunities for human-centered approaches to help support the aims and mission of the Innovation Campus. But I can speak more specifically about ways that the Tech for Humanity initiative is engaged across the university in different colleges and departments. Of course, if you look at the website where we feature a lot of the work, we have representation from across the colleges at Virginia Tech on the comprehensiveness of the opportunities and challenges for technology. So that has to include, and does, our faculty who are doing work in arts and design and creativity, in engineering and business, agricultural science is very important as well. Our food supply networks are being deeply shaped by the innovation that's happening in technology and human machine combining for purposes of assisting people with labor. And another way that has emerged across university, again, we have been newly admitted to the Public Interest Technology University Network. And so we're building our public interest technology team at Virginia Tech. That team is including faculty across our university, across colleges, across campuses. who are going to be able to collaborate more effectively with like-minded colleagues at other institutions who are really attuned to the importance of shaping the future of talent in a way so that our students, as they move through our colleges and universities, understand that being a technologist needs to mean many different things possibly. For many people, that's going to be technical skills and design and coding systems and helping to design physical innovation systems or infrastructure. For others, that's going to be really understanding the interface between the technology systems and highly vulnerable populations. That's understanding systems of inequality that Professor Hester was just describing so brilliantly is understanding the need for new policy frameworks. One of our big challenges is how to bring regulatory administration to technology so we can get the outputs and the aims that we want. We want a world that we'd like to live in and not the opposite. And so we have to be intentional about that. And so we've involved faculty across the university to be part of the public the public interest technology team that's going to be leading these efforts. So those are a couple of ways.
Thank you.
Our next question is for Dr. Hester. One of your courses is Monsters, Zombies, and Cyborgs, which sounds fascinating and fun and like a class I would really like to take. Can you tell us a little bit more about that course?
Sure. Well, I think the title says a lot, but it actually masks a lot as well, because people do take the class and think we're just going to be watching movies about zombies all the time. And actually, it's a very serious class that looks at the ethics and politics of biomedical science. So the idea of monsters really kind of looks at the ways that physicians, we start with reading Frankenstein, and we look at how physicians are participating and life science researchers are participating in creating and enhancing forms of humanity. And the question that we ask is, what responsibility do these technologists, do these people who are engaged in this form of science have to the population that they serve? So the idea then, just like the question that is asked in Frankenstein is, how did what responsibility does Dr. Frankenstein have to his monster? We ask a similar question about physicians and researchers. And then we move on to zombies, and we talk about the politics of infectious disease and how we should discuss that, how we should respond to it. Is it better, for example, to put all of our eggs in developing a vaccine, or would it perhaps be better to provide universal health care such that then we would prevent the spread of infectious disease and be able to catch it earlier? So again, we talk about the ethics and the politics. And then we finish with talking about cyborgs, because there is a very real movement underfoot where people are pushing for not just biomedical technologies that would do things like quote unquote fix disability, but that would actually enhance cognitively and physically the human body. And so the question is, to what end should we have these technologies? And so overall, the course looks at how our social values get into the sciences and the technologies that we make, but also how those sciences and technologies transform what it means to be human. Does it make us more or less human? And in what ways? And does this match up with the ways that our social values, that, as Dr. Johnson said, does it really result in living in the kind of world that we want to live in?
Thank you very much.
And Dr. Brantly, can you tell us a little bit more about the real life scenarios you use to prepare our students? For example, Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, so as a part of the integrated security program that we've developed a series of servers and simulations that we can host up to about 300 students at a time in a real world crisis simulation. And one of the ones that we leverage is a major superstorm like event hitting the New York City metropolitan area. And so students working distributed, either in our classroom, which we haven't been able to do recently, but also remotely, can work together in teams to address security issues ranging from multilingual communities, communities with different economic resource means, and a whole host of different concerns ranging from environmental concerns of storms, storm surge and water issues, to technological issues such as cyber attacks and all these multifaceted dynamics that occur when crises hit and happen. And so our students work together in large teams. They each have an individual responsibility. So somebody's always the mayor, somebody's always the president, somebody's always the chief of police. And but we also have Department of Mental and Health and Human Hygiene, construction and buildings. And so they really take on those roles, and they kind of become those individuals, and they actually become very intense on it in becoming those individuals and defending their jurisdictional territory and thinking about different groups. One thing that oftentimes comes up is, how do we take care of prisoners on Rikers Island during a major storm that might flood the prison? And you might not think that students in Blacksburg, Virginia might care about the concerns of incarcerated individuals on an island in New York, but they fight tooth and nail to make sure that those individuals are safe during the simulation. And we see the same for everybody throughout the simulation. And the whole concept is to take 50,000 foot level issues of security, whether it be environmental security or economic security or digital security, and lower them down to the individual level, to the human impact level, to get students to start thinking about things at a very nuanced level, and doing so in ways that allow them to think beyond their discipline, and to think about how they can make a difference in the world.
Thank you so much. I knew this would be such an exciting topic, and your work, all of you, is having such an impact on what's happening today and where we're headed. So thank you so much to all three of you for joining us today and for sharing your time and energy with the Virginia Tech community. It makes a difference to our alumni and to everyone around the world with all the impact that your work is having. I'd also like to thank Christina Miller and her colleagues from the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences for their collaboration on this inaugural Hokies for Good event. We look forward to bringing you more events highlighting the force for change that Hokies are making around the world. So be sure to visit our website at alumni.vt.edu for more information on Hokies for Good, also more information on Tech for Humanity and where you can find out all about and where you can find AMS and research that's going on and other upcoming events. So thank you, and go Hokies.